Something the grand hall of the Zivar Imperium was silent. Tall, glowing pillars stretched high into the darkness, their golden light reflecting off the polished black floors. Hundreds of Zivar nobles and warriors stood in rows, their piercing blue eyes fixed on the figure kneeling in chains at the center of the chamber. Lieutenant James Carter, a human soldier, kept his head high despite the heavy restraints on his wrists. His uniform was torn, his body bruised from battle, but his spirit remained unbroken. He had been captured after his unit was ambushed on the war-torn planet Virazal. Now he faced judgment before Princess Gagzalvana, heir to the Zivar throne. The princess sat on an elevated throne, her silver armor gleaming under the soft glow of the chamber's lights. Unlike the other Zivar, her gaze held no hatred, only curiosity. She was taller than a human, with smooth violet skin, golden markings across her arms, and long dark hair woven with silver beads. A crown of crystalline spikes sat upon her head, a symbol of her absolute authority. A deep voice echoed through the hall as Chancellor Vezir, one of the oldest and most powerful Zivar, stepped forward. This human was found trespassing in our sacred lands, leading an attack against our warriors, the Chancellor declared, his sharp features twisting with disgust. By the laws of the Zivar, he must be punished. The crowd murmured in approval, but the princess remained silent. James tightened his fists. He had been captured, yes, but he had not come here to invade. His mission had been to rescue civilians, but the Zivar saw all humans as enemies. Finally, Gagzalvana raised a hand, and the room fell silent. Her golden eyes locked onto James. You are human, yet you fought without fear. You stood against my warriors even when you had no chance of victory. James met her gaze. I fight to protect my people, just as you fight to protect yours. Some of the Zivar nobles scoffed at his words, but the princess did not react. Instead, she leaned forward slightly. Do you understand the punishment for your crime? James already knew. The Zivar rarely took prisoners. He had expected a swift execution, but something about the princess's tone made him uneasy. There was something else at play here. Gagzalvana stood, her long cloak flowing behind her. There is another path. The murmurs in the hall grew louder. The Chancellor frowned but said nothing. The princess continued. According to our oldest traditions, a captured enemy warrior may prove their worth through the rite of mating. James blinked. The what? The hall erupted in whispers, but Gagzalvana remained calm. It is not what you think, human, she said, almost amused. The rite is not about mere survival. It is a test of strength, intelligence, and endurance. It determines whether a warrior is truly worthy. James frowned. And if I refuse? The Chancellor stepped forward. Then you will be executed immediately. James exhaled slowly. So those were his choices, death or participation in some strange alien tradition. He had no idea what this trial involved, but one thing was clear. The Zivar were testing him. They wanted to see if he was truly a warrior or just another human to be crushed under their rule. Gagzalvana studied him for a moment before speaking again. You are the first human to ever be given this choice. If you survive the rite, you will not be treated as a prisoner. You will earn a place among us. James wasn't sure what that meant. A place among them. Would he become part of their army? A political tool? There were too many questions, but one thing was certain. He wasn't ready to die. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to stand despite the pain in his body. He met Gagzalvana's gaze without hesitation. I accept the challenge. The hall erupted in noise. Some Zivar laughed. Others whispered in disbelief. Even the Chancellor looked shocked. But Gagzalvana only nodded. Then it is decided. She turned to the assembled court. At sunrise, the rite of mating shall begin. James had no idea what he had just agreed to, but he knew one thing for certain. His fight was far from over. James Carter stood in the middle of the grand chamber, his heart steady but his mind racing. The Zivar had taken off his restraints, but he knew he wasn't free. Far from it. The rite of mating, whatever it was, would decide his fate. Princess Evzalvana watched him with unreadable golden eyes. She was calm, controlled, her violet skin glowing under the chamber's light. Around them, Zyvar nobles whispered among themselves, some amused, some doubtful. Chancellor Vezir finally spoke. The human has accepted the challenge. The trial will begin at sunrise. A loud gong echoed through the hall, signaling the end of the judgment. Guards stepped forward, ready to escort James away. But Evzalvana raised her hand. "Wait, I will take him myself." Gasps filled the room. Even the Chancellor looked surprised. James frowned. He didn't trust these aliens, but something about the princess felt different. Unlike the others, she didn't seem to hate him. But he still didn't know her true intentions. Without another word, Evzalvana turned and walked toward a doorway. James hesitated for only a second before following her. They walked through long, dimly lit corridors, the walls carved with ancient symbols. The palace was massive, built with alien precision, and every step echoed in the silence. Finally, Evzalvana stopped before a door and pressed her hand against a glowing panel. It slid open, revealing a private chamber filled with soft golden light. A large circular platform stood in the center, surrounded by strange holographic displays. James stepped inside cautiously. "What is this place?" Evzalvana turned to him, her expression calm. "This is my personal training room." James looked around. The walls shimmered with energy fields, and the air felt charged with power. "You will need to prepare for the trial," she continued. "The rite of mating is not just a ceremony. It is a test of strength, intelligence, and survival." James folded his arms. "And what exactly am I supposed to do?" Evzalvana took a step closer, studying him carefully. "You must prove that you are a worthy warrior. The Zyvar do not believe humans are strong enough to be equals. If you fail, you will be seen as weak, and you will not leave this planet alive." James exhaled sharply. "Great. No pressure, then." The princess tilted her head slightly, as if amused. "Your people and mine have been enemies for too long. If you succeed, you will be the first human to stand among us with honor. But you must survive the trials first." James nodded. He had fought in wars, faced impossible odds, and endured battles that should have killed him. If this was just another challenge, then he would face it the same way. "All right," he said. "Let's begin." The first test came at dawn. James stood inside a massive combat arena, surrounded by towering walls of alien metal. Hundreds of Zyvar warriors and nobles had gathered to watch, their eyes burning with interest. The sky above was a deep shade of purple, with two suns rising in the distance. Evzalvana stood on a high balcony, her royal cloak flowing behind her. "The first trial," she announced, "is a test of combat. To prove yourself, you must face 3 of our strongest warriors." James clenched his fists. 3 against 1. That hardly seemed fair. A loud drumbeat filled the air as a giant gate at the far end of the arena slowly opened. The first challenger stepped out. The Zyvar warrior was massive, easily 8 feet tall, covered in silver armor, and holding a long energy spear that crackled with power. His muscles were like steel, and his sharp reptilian eyes locked onto James like a predator sizing up its prey. James exhaled, rolling his shoulders. He had no weapon, no armor, just his instincts and training. "Begin," Evzalvana called out. The warrior charge. James barely dodged the first strike as the energy spear sliced through the air where his head had been a second ago. The force of the attack sent a shockwave across the arena floor. James rolled to the side, coming up quickly, searching for an opening. The Zyvar was strong, but strength alone wasn't enough. The warrior lunged again, aiming to impale him. James reacted instantly. He twisted his body and grabbed the spear shaft with both hands, using the warrior's own momentum against him. With a sudden yank, he pulled the weapon forward, causing the massive Zyvar to stumble. That was all the opening James needed. He spun and drove his elbow into the warrior's ribs, right in the gap of his armor. The Zivar let out a grunt of pain, staggering back. The crowd gasped. A human had just landed a hit on one of their elite warriors. But the fight wasn't over. The Zivar snarled, recovering quickly. He swung his spear in a wide arc, aiming to crush James with sheer force. James ducked. The spear slammed into the ground, sending sparks flying. In the same motion, James jumped forward, planting his foot on the warrior's knee and leaping onto his back. Before the Zivar could react, James wrapped an arm around his thick neck and locked in a chokehold. The warrior thrashed, trying to throw him off, but James held on with all his strength. Seconds passed. Then, with a final grunt, the Zivar's struggle slowed, and he collapsed to the ground, unconscious. The arena went silent. James got to his feet, breathing hard. His body ached, but he was still standing. He looked up at Talvana. She was watching him with something new in her eyes. Respect. But James knew it wasn't over yet. There were still 2 more warriors to face, and the hardest part of the trial was yet to come. James Carter stood over the fallen Zivar warrior, his breath heavy but controlled. He had won the first fight, but this was only the beginning. 2 more warriors still stood between him and survival. Princess Exalvana watched from her high balcony, her golden eyes filled with interest. "The human has defeated the first challenger," she announced, her voice calm but powerful. "But the trials are not over." The second warrior stepped forward. A loud metallic clang echoed through the arena as another massive gate opened. James narrowed his eyes as the next challenger walked out. This time, it wasn't just 1 warrior. It was 2. The first was a female Zivar, tall and lean, her blue skin arced with glowing tribal symbols. She held 2 curved blades, spinning them effortlessly between her fingers. The second was a hulking brute, larger than the last opponent, his body wrapped in heavy armor. He carried a thick battle staff crackling with energy. James exhaled slowly. 2 against 1. Now that's just unfair. The crowd murmured, sensing the shift in odds. Exalvana raised a hand. "Proceed." The female warrior struck first. She was fast, almost too fast. Before James could react, she was already upon him, her blades slashing through the air in deadly arcs. James barely dodged the first strike. He twisted his body, narrowly avoiding the second. The third came faster, too fast. A sharp burning pain ran across his left arm as one of her blades nicked him. Blood dripped down, but James didn't have time to think. The second warrior charged forward, swinging his battle staff like a battering ram. James ducked just in time. The staff smashed into the ground, sending a shockwave through the arena. If that had hit him, he would have been crushed. He needed a plan. Fast. The female warrior pressed forward, her movements graceful but lethal. James stepped back, dodging each strike, but he was running out of room. Then he saw his opening. She aimed a slash at his chest. James leaned back just enough to avoid it, then grabbed her wrist mid-swing. Before she could react, he twisted sharply, using her own momentum to flip her over his shoulder. She crashed into the ground, stunned. But James had no time to celebrate. The battle staff was already coming for him again. James jumped aside, but the energy from the weapon still sent a shock through his body. His muscles tensed for a second, but he forced himself to move. The brute was strong, but James had learned one thing from fighting Zivar warriors: they relied too much on size and power. James faked a stumble, pretending to be dazed. The brute took the bait. He raised his battle staff for a crushing blow. But James moved first. He lunged forward and drove his fist into the brute's knee. The Zivar roared in pain and staggered. James followed up immediately, throwing his entire weight into a punch to the warrior's side, right where the armor had a weak spot. The brute fell to one knee, gasping. The female warrior was back on her feet now, eyes blazing with fury. She rushed toward James once more, her blades ready to strike. But James was ready too. He grabbed the fallen brute's battle staff, swinging it with all his strength. The end of the staff smashed into her midsection, sending her flying backward. She hit the ground hard and didn't get back up. James turned back to the brute, gripping the staff tightly. The Zyvar warrior stared at him for a long moment. Then, to James's surprise, he nodded, a silent acknowledgement of defeat, before collapsing. The arena went silent again. Then, a thunderous roar of cheers erupted from the crowd. James stood there, breathing heavily, his body aching but victorious. He looked up at Talvanna. The Zyvar princess met his gaze. For the first time, a small smile touched her lips. But James knew what was coming next. One more challenge remained. And this time, he had the feeling it would be the hardest one yet. James Carter stood in the center of the arena, gripping the battle staff tightly. His body ached from the last fight. His breaths were heavy, but he remained standing. The second challenge had been brutal. 2 opponents at once. He had managed to win, but at a cost. His left arm was still bleeding from the cut, and his muscles screamed in pain. Above him, Princess Exalvanna watched in silence. The crowd murmured, waiting for the final challenge. Then the princess stood. "The human has proven his strength," she announced, her voice ringing across the arena. "But one final trial remains. Only by overcoming this test will he earn his fate." A deep metallic groan echoed as the largest gate of the arena slowly opened. James clenched his jaw. A massive figure stepped out, and the entire arena fell silent. This warrior was different. Taller than the others, easily over 8 feet, with dark, obsidian-colored skin and glowing red eyes. His body was covered in thick armor, heavier than anything James had seen before. He carried no weapon, because he didn't need one. James exhaled. Great, a giant. The warrior stomped forward, each step shaking the ground. James tightened his grip on the battle staff. He had fought tough enemies before, but this one felt different. There was an air of pure confidence around this warrior, as if he had never lost a fight in his life. Princess Exalvanna raised her hand. "Begin." The warrior charged forward. James barely had time to react. The first punch came like a thunderbolt. James leaped to the side, but even the shockwave of air nearly knocked him off his feet. He swung his battle staff, aiming for the warrior's leg. Crack! The staff hit, but it barely made a difference. The warrior didn't even flinch. James' eyes widened. Oh, that's not good. Before he could move, a massive hand grabbed his chest and lifted him off the ground like he weighed nothing. "Gah!" James gasped, struggling against the grip. The warrior's red eyes glowed as he pulled James closer, as if studying him. Then, he threw James across the arena. James hit the ground hard, rolling several feet before coming to a stop. His entire body burned with pain. The crowd gasped. For the first time in the trials, it looked like James might lose. He coughed, forcing himself to stand. His vision was blurry. His limbs felt heavy. But he wasn't done yet. The warrior stalked forward, slow and deliberate. James took a shaky breath. He needed a new strategy. Fast. Power wouldn't work. This warrior was stronger than him, faster than him, and completely resistant to pain. But maybe he could use that against him. James wiped the blood from his lip. "All right, big guy. Let's see how smart you are." The warrior charged again. But this time, James didn't dodge. Instead, he ran toward him. The crowd gasped in shock. At the last moment, James slid under the warrior's legs, narrowly avoiding a crushing punch. He swung his battle staff sideways, striking the back of the warrior's knee, right at the joint. The warrior stumbled, just for a second. It was the first real reaction he had shown. James grinned. "Got you." The warrior turned with a snarl, swinging his massive arm. James ducked, barely dodging. He moved fast, circling around the warrior, striking again and again. Knees, elbows, joints, places where the armor was weakest. The warrior grew frustrated. He swung wildly, trying to catch James, but James was too fast now. With a final, well-aimed strike, James smashed the battle staff into the warrior's temple. For the first time, the warrior staggered back. James didn't stop. He jumped, using all his strength, and delivered a devastating kick to the warrior's head. The warrior's eyes dimmed. And then, finally, he collapsed. The arena went silent. James stood over the fallen warrior, breathing hard, barely able to believe it. Then, the crowd erupted into cheers. Above, Princess Exalvana watched, her golden eyes filled with something new, respect. She stood once more. The trial is over. James looked up at her. His body was exhausted, but his mind was racing. What happens now? The princess smiled. The human has proven himself worthy. Now, he will receive his reward. James blinked. Wait, reward. The crowd cheered even louder. James had survived, but he had no idea what came next. James Carter stood in the center of the grand arena, his body aching, his breaths heavy. The crowd's cheers echoed around him, but his mind was still racing. He had won. He had survived the final challenge. But now, standing before Princess Exalvana, he wasn't sure what came next. The towering alien princess descended from her royal platform, stepping gracefully onto the sandy battlefield. Her golden eyes shone with something unreadable: curiosity, respect, or perhaps something else entirely. She raised a hand, and instantly, the entire crowd fell silent. The human has proven his worth, she announced, her voice strong and regal. Through strength, skill, and resilience, he has conquered the trials. Now he shall receive his rightful reward. James wiped the sweat from his forehead. Yeah, about that. What exactly is my reward? A murmur spread through the audience. Some laughed, others whispered excitedly. Exalvana stepped closer, her tall and elegant form casting a shadow over him. You do not know. James shrugged. Not a clue. I was kind of focused on not dying. The princess studied him for a long moment before nodding. Then I shall explain. She turned to the crowd and spoke with pride. For generations, our people have upheld the right of judgment. The strongest warriors, those who overcome our greatest trials, are granted the highest honor. She looked back at James, her expression unreadable. The honor of becoming my mate. Silence. James blinked. Wait. What? The crowd erupted into cheers once more, celebrating as if this was the most natural thing in the world. James, on the other hand, was stunned. He had expected gold, freedom, maybe even a ticket home. But this? Hold on, he said, raising his hands. Are you telling me I just fought for marriage? Exalvana's golden eyes narrowed slightly. You fought for honor. This is the reward that follows. It is the way of my people. James exhaled sharply, trying to process. Look, princess, I respect your customs, but where I come from, people usually get to, choose their own relationships. A deep, surprised murmur rippled through the crowd. The idea of rejecting the princess seemed unthinkable to them. Exalvana's expression didn't change, but something in her gaze softened. Then tell me, human, if not this, what is it that you desire? James hesitated. He hadn't thought that far ahead. He had only come to this alien world as part of a military peacekeeping force. He hadn't planned on getting caught in a battle for survival or an unexpected marriage proposal. He glanced around, feeling the weight of thousands of eyes on him. He had to choose his next words carefully. I want answers. Asterisk. Exalvana tilted her head. Answers. James nodded. Why me? Why this? Why are humans even part of your traditions now? The princess studied him for a moment before turning to her guards. Clear the arena. The trials are finished. The massive gates opened once more, and the crowd slowly dispersed, though their excited whispers continued. Soon, only a handful of royal guards remained, standing at attention. Zalvanna turned back to James. Come with me. She led him through the grand halls of her palace, past towering statues of ancient warriors and glowing banners filled with alien script. James followed cautiously. So, are you actually going to answer my questions? The princess gave him a sideways glance. Only if you are prepared to hear the truth. James sighed. I fought giant aliens in an arena. I think I can handle the truth. She stopped before a large door, its surface shimmering with an unknown energy. She placed her hand against it, and the door opened silently. Inside was a chamber filled with floating holograms, historical records. Zalvanna stepped inside and gestured to a glowing image of Earth. James stiffened. That's my home. The princess nodded. Our people have known of humans for centuries. Long before your kind even realized there was life beyond your own world. James frowned. What are you saying? You've been watching us. She shook her head. Not just watching. Learning. She gestured again, and the hologram shifted to display battles, human conflicts, wars, moments of incredible bravery and sacrifice. Humans are unique, Zalvanna said. Unlike many species, you do not just survive. You endure, you adapt. You fight against impossible odds and come out stronger. James crossed his arms, and that's why you threw me into the trials. To see if I was strong enough. Zalvanna turned to face him fully. No, you were chosen because we seek to unite our people with yours. We need warriors like you, leaders like you, and in our culture, the strongest bond is forged through battle. James let out a slow breath. It was a lot to take in. The princess took a step closer, her expression more serious now. This was not just a test of strength, James Carter. It was a test of spirit, and you have proven yourself. James met her gaze, trying to understand her true intentions. He had fought for survival, but now he was at a crossroads. Would he accept this new fate, or would he find a way to change it? One thing was certain. His journey was far from over. James Carter stood inside the glowing chamber, his eyes locked on the floating holograms that revealed Earth's history. Wars, victories, sacrifices. Humanity's struggles were laid out before him like an open book. Princess Zalvanna stood beside him, watching his reaction closely. Her golden eyes held patience, but also expectation. You are more than just a warrior, James Carter, she said. You are a symbol of what humans can achieve. That is why you were chosen. James let out a slow breath, his mind still racing. So, what now? You expect me to just accept all of this? Accept you. Zalvanna studied him for a moment. I expect nothing. The choice is yours. James frowned. That doesn't sound right. If this is some ancient rite, shouldn't I be forced into it? The princess gave a small smile. My people respect tradition, but we also respect strength. And strength is not only about fighting. It is about standing by your beliefs. James crossed his arms. Then what if I say no? Zalvanna turned to one of the glowing projections. A new image appeared, a fleet of ships, massive and advanced, hovering over an alien world. Then you will be free to leave. No harm will come to you. But know this, rejecting this bond may have consequences beyond yourself. James narrowed his eyes. What do you mean? She gestured toward another hologram. It showed a council of alien leaders, discussing something with serious expressions. Not all in my kingdom agree with uniting with humans, she admitted. Some believe we should conquer your people instead. That humans are a threat rather than an ally. James stiffened. You're saying, if I refuse, it could make things worse between our species. Zalvanna nodded. Your survival in the trials has already changed things. You have proven that humans are stronger than many believed. Some see that as a reason for peace. Others see it as a reason to prepare for war. James exhaled. He had never wanted to be part of something this big. He was just a soldier following orders. And yet, somehow, he was now standing at the center of an intergalactic decision. He looked at the princess again. She was proud, confident, but not unkind. There was no deception in her words. She had given him a real choice. But was there really a right choice? James turned away from the holograms and ran a hand through his hair. And if I said yes, what happens then? Zalvanna stepped closer, her tone softer now. Then you would stand beside me. As my mate, yes. But more than that. You would have a voice in our kingdom. You could help shape the future between our species. James sighed. So it's not just about tradition. It's about diplomacy too. She nodded. Yes, but she hesitated for the first time. It is not just political for me. James raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Zalvanna took a slow breath, as if choosing her words carefully. You have impressed me, James Carter. Not just with your strength, but with your spirit. You fought against impossible odds, yet you did not break. You did not fight only for survival. You fought for your own sense of honor. That is rare. And I respect it. James wasn't sure how to respond. He had spent the entire time thinking of Zalvanna as just a ruler, a warrior who followed tradition. But now, she was showing something else, something more personal. Did she actually care about him? Before he could process, the doors to the chamber slammed open. A group of heavily armed guards rushed in, their weapons raised. Your Highness, one of them called. The council has called an emergency meeting. There has been an attack. Zalvanna's expression darkened. By whom? The guard hesitated. A faction within our own ranks. They claim that the human's victory was a mistake, that he must be eliminated before he disrupts our ways. James clenched his fists. Great. More people who want me dead. Zalvanna turned to him, her eyes serious. You see now, James Carter, your presence here has already changed things. There are those who fear change, and they would rather destroy it than accept it. James exhaled sharply. And what's the plan? Do we run? Zalvanna smiled, but there was no fear in it. No, we fight. James smirked. Now you're speaking my language. She turned to her guards. Prepare the palace defenses. No one threatens my kingdom and lives to boast about it. The guards saluted and rushed out. James watched her, feeling something shift inside him. He had spent his life following orders, fighting battles that others commanded. But this was different. For the first time, he wasn't just a soldier. He was part of something bigger. And maybe he was ready to choose his place in it. The palace trembled as distant explosions echoed through the grand halls. The rebels had begun their attack. The guards rushed to their positions, and defensive shields flickered to life around the palace walls. James Carter tightened his grip on the alien blade Zalvanna had given him. It was heavier than the weapons he was used to, but its edge was sharp, and he had no doubt it could cut through enemy armor. He turned to the princess, who stood tall, her golden eyes burning with determination. We need to get to the command center, she said. If they breach the inner gates, they will try to take the throne room. James nodded. Then we hold them off until reinforcements arrive. Zalvanna gave him a small smile. You speak as if you are already one of us. James smirked. I guess I don't like people trying to kill me. Call it human survival instinct. A sudden explosion near the entrance sent a shockwave through the chamber. The doors burst open, and armed rebels charged in, their weapons glowing with energy. For the purity of the Empire, one of them shouted. James didn't wait. He lunged forward, slashing his blade in a wide arc. The first attacker barely had time to react before James struck him down. He rolled to the side, dodging an energy blast, then drove his weapon into another enemy. Zalvanna fought beside him, her movements graceful but deadly. She parried an attack and spun, delivering a precise strike to the enemy's armor. The rebels underestimated her. They thought her just a ruler, but she was a warrior first. More rebels stormed into the chamber. James clenched his teeth. "We're outnumbered." Zalvanna tapped a device on her wrist. "Hold them for a few moments longer." James deflected another attack, ducked under a strike, and knocked an enemy to the ground. Just when it seemed they were being pushed back, a loud roar filled the chamber. The palace reinforcements had arrived. Elite royal guards charged in, their weapons blazing. The rebels hesitated, their confidence shaken. Within minutes, the tide of battle turned. One by one, the attackers fell. Some surrendered, realizing their defeat. James exhaled, wiping sweat from his brow. That was close. Zalvanna sheathed her blade. "It is over." The remaining rebels were arrested, and the palace secured. The crisis had passed, but James knew this battle had only been a small part of a larger conflict. Zalvanna turned to him. "You fought well, James Carter. Once again, you prove why you were chosen." James met her gaze. "So, what happens now?" She took a deep breath. "Now, you must decide. Will you leave, or will you stay and stand by my side?" James looked around. A few days ago, he was just a soldier, following orders on a distant battlefield. Now, he had fought for a kingdom that wasn't his, alongside warriors who had become allies. And standing before him was a princess. No, a leader who had given him respect and a choice. He smiled. "I think I've already made my decision." Zalvanna's eyes softened. "Then, James Carter, from this moment forward, you are no longer just a soldier of Earth. You are part of something greater." James nodded. "Let's build a future worth fighting for." As the sun rose over the palace, James knew this was only the beginning.